Hello and welcome. You're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. Here are our headlines this evening. France bears some overwhelming responsibility for the Rwandan genocide. So says a report submitted to Emmanuel Macron by a commission of historians on Friday. More on that at the top of the show. And Eritrea will withdraw troops from Ethiopia's northern Tigray region along the border between the two countries. Thousands of civilians are thought to have been killed in Tigray since November. And in Ivory Coast, one of the continent's biggest circus festivals is underway, with performers attending from across West Africa. Our reporters went to check it out. More on that later on. Now, it's a damning report laying out France's failings during the Rwandan genocide that saw 800,000, mostly Tutsis, massacred back in 1994. The main conclusions of that report: France is guilty of a political and military failure, but the document stopped short of accusing the French authorities of complicity in genocide. Shirley Sitbon has all the details.
27 years after the genocide in Rwanda, a group of French historians issued its report saying France bears overwhelming responsibilities over the genocide. French authorities backed the regime, which was racist, corrupt, and violent, it said, based on the French government's belief Tutsi rebels were a threat to its Hutu allies. France armed and trained Hutu government forces.
Les autorités françaises ont mené une politique qui est une politique qui a été totalement déconnectée de la réalité, une politique qui portait les stigmates de la colonisation, ultra-ethniciste et au fond a accentué, la crise ethnique.
The report says France was blind to preparations to the genocide. In 2019, France 24 broadcast a testimony of the former head of military cooperation in Rwanda. He said he alerted his superiors about the imminent threat of a genocide, but France did nothing. Among many events examined in the report, the fact that France refused to arrest Hutu leaders when they entered a safe zone set up for victims. The French commander urged Paris to give him the right to stop them. The French president refused, as explained by his former office chief.
Le mandat des Nations Unies, il est humanitaire, il n'est pas judiciaire. C'est pas le bras armé d'une cour pénale.
Rwanda has accused France of complicity in the genocide, but the French historian's report says nothing in the archives corroborates that theory.
Now, earlier I spoke to Jessica Mwiza Gérondal. She's vice president of Ibuka France, an NGO that works for the memory of the genocide in Rwanda. I started by asking her reaction to the report.
We are not the average NGO. We represent survivors of the genocide against the Tutsis. So we cannot participate right now to all the noises. We really need to read it first.
So in terms of the composition of that commission, it was a commission of historians appointed by the French government. Some were critical that there was no Rwandan voice as a part of that commission. What do you make of those criticisms?
As an anti-racist activist, it reminds me of the debate, who is neutral enough to talk about racism? Unfortunately, the answer is often white people. And those kinds of thinking are very common in France, actually. So I think they applied the same reasoning about this commission, like, who is neutral enough to talk about France's role in Rwanda? And the answer was, naturally for them, French non-expert historians. So, yes, that was a wrong start.
Now, I know you said you want to read the entire report before responding perhaps to all aspects of it, but the conclusion that there was no complicity in genocide, how do you understand that interpretation?
Actually, I don't understand that interpretation, and I don't understand the use of the word blindness either. Those words are really incorrect and problematic because there are already a lot of papers, books, and very serious research about the way, about the perfect awareness of French decision makers at the time.
So just to pick you up on that, France is blind to the genocide but not complicit. That was one quote from the report. So you're saying you're disagreeing with the notion that France would have been blind to the genocide?
Yes, because nobody was blind. They were perfectly aware of what was going on. And so nobody was blind about nothing. And we already know that since like forever.
Do you think, perhaps despite some imperfections, that this report will go some way to helping exorcise the ghosts of this terrible tragedy back in 1994?
Maybe, but it's one of many reports, books, research on the topic. So I will continue to support the work of some others, excellent historians about the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. So maybe it will be something, maybe not. We will see after the reading.
Eritrea will withdraw its troops from Ethiopia. This, according to the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The news comes just days after Ethiopia finally acknowledged that Eritrean forces had crossed the border and entered into Ethiopia's northern Tigray region during the country's 5-month-old conflict. Monty Francis reports.
An announcement that could potentially lead to a breakthrough after months of conflict. In a statement from the Eritrean capital, Ethiopia's prime minister said Eritrea had agreed to withdraw its forces from the Ethiopian border, and the Ethiopian National Defense Force would take over immediately. While Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has only acknowledged Eritrean troops took over border areas once they were abandoned by Ethiopian forces. Displaced residents from Tigray have a markedly different take on events.
People were killed by bullets, heavy weapons and tanks were fired, and the houses were burnt. This is when the people fled. If they caught them, they killed them. It was the Eritrean army doing this.
You could not say anything. You could not speak. Whether things were good or bad, you just said good.
Earlier this week, Abiy Ahmed finally acknowledged the presence of Eritrean troops in Tigray and admitted that war crimes had been committed, although he didn't say by whom.
With regards to human rights violations, war is destructive. There is no question that it harms a lot of people. There is destruction that occurred in the Tigray region. Disregarding the exaggerations, the propaganda and the lies, there is information that indicates women were raped.
Ethiopia's prime minister sent troops into Tigray in early November and blamed the region's once dominant ruling party, the TPLF, for attacks on army camps, while Abiy Ahmed won the Nobel Peace Prize for his rapprochement with Eritrea. The TPLF and Asmara remained bitter enemies. Ahmed even suggested Eritrean forces got tangled up in the conflict in Tigray after being provoked.
Now for some other news stories from across the continent this Friday. In Egypt, at least 32 people have died with scores more injured in a collision between two trains in the southern province of Sohag. Egypt has one of the oldest rail networks in North Africa, and accidents causing casualties are common. In 2019 alone, over 1,800 train accidents occurred. Now, more than 1,000 people have been left homeless in Sierra Leone after a huge fire blazed out of control in one of the largest slums in the capital, Freetown. The fire broke out on Wednesday evening in Susan's Bay along the city's seafront. Some 400 homes were destroyed. Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has named Patrick Achi as Prime Minister. This follows the death of a second Premier in the country in less than 8 months. Achi served as Ouattara's former Chief of Staff and has been acting as interim Prime Minister since the hospitalisation of his predecessor, Hamed Bakayoko. Now, one South African nature guide has broken a world record by doing 30,000 burpees in 10 days. The initiative is called Burpees for Conservation, and the goal to raise both money and awareness for wildlife conservation. Now, by the end of the challenge, it is hoped 1 million South African rand will have been raised for the cause. Let's take a look at participants in that challenge.
Let's go. Let's cross his leg. Lega Bruce.
And earlier I spoke to Bruce Lawson, who's behind that initiative, Burpees for Conservation. Let's take a listen to him.
The idea, I think, a moment of insanity once again. It was just, I'm moving to Australia, and I'm in quarantine at the moment, and I thought 14 days in quarantine looking at four walls, I'll drive myself mad. So I might as well do something that is very close to my heart. And I thought I'd raise money for conservation in the Greater Kruger area, the Greater Kruger National Park area. And that's what we decided to do. So Chembo Africa is the NGO foundation, and we put together this Burpees for Conservation to raise money for the field rangers who fight this war day in and day out. They're on the front line. And because of tourism, the drop of tourism during the COVID period, their budgets have been cut for training. So we raised money specifically for that.
So you're a founding member of Chembo Africa Foundation, and it was for that foundation that you created this initiative. And so really the issues that this foundation looks at is poaching of wild animals, right? And the human encroachment on their habitats. Tell us about the work of the foundation to try to push back against those problems.
Yeah, so primarily the foundation is to look after the conservation of all these wilderness areas, and in doing the conservation of these areas is also looking after the communities that live on the fringes of these areas. Now we raise money and we give it to organizations that are directly linked to helping all those fringe communities and then the people inside these conservation areas. We don't specifically target one group of, say, Save the Elephants or anything like that. We give it to the greater cause of the whole area. And in this case, we're raising money for the Greater Kruger Environmental Protection Foundation, which is an NGO that was started by the private game reserves that border and are open to the Kruger National Park on the western side of the Kruger National Park.
So the aim is to raise 1 million rand, right? 1 million South African rand. The challenge is going into next month, into the month of April. Tell us how much longer, even if you've broken a world record already, but this challenge is continuing, right?
Absolutely, yes. So I did 30,000 burpees in 10 days in my hotel room over here, hopefully setting a new record, not really breaking one, but setting a world record. That was the start of the campaign. But there are 3,600 people at present doing burpees all around the world. We've done over 320,000 burpees worldwide. We're trying to get to 1 million, and this initiative carries on until the 11th of April. And I'm continuing burpees every day up until the 11th of April. I'm not doing 3,000 a day, but I will continue this campaign just so that we can try push to get to those 1 million burpees, which is one of our benchmarks, and more importantly, to get to 1 million rand, which will make a difference for the field rangers on the ground.
Are you not exhausted?
I am very tired. I had a good 12-hour sleep the day before yesterday. The day after I finished, my shoulders are sore, but, there's no excuse to stop. People out there are hunting poachers day in and day out, sun, rain, through very, very exhausting times. So I can't stop. I'm in a nice hotel room getting fed. I might as well carry on doing burpees.
Okay, just in the little bit of time we've left, I mean, in researching before this interview, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, some of their statistics are deeply shocking. I'm not sure to what extent viewers would be aware of this, but just to focus on elephants, even if it is sometimes the cliche issue, at least 60% of savanna elephants have the population has decreased by at least 60% over the past 50 years. Then for forest elephants, the other species on the African continent, 86% decrease in 31 years. I mean, these are devastating decreases in the population of wildlife.
Massive, absolutely massive. And that doesn't only go for elephants, that goes for other iconic species like the rhino, the lion species. All of the species out there are getting hammered at the moment. So it is a huge, huge problem.
Now, the fourth edition of Ivory Coast's annual Circus Festival is in full flow. The country's cultural sector has been hard hit by the COVID crisis, and so fittingly, the theme of this year's event is resistance. It's the largest festival of its kind in West Africa, drawing in performers from Burkina Faso, Guinea, Ivory Coast and elsewhere in an energetic display of culture coming back to life. Thijs Broek and Sam Bradpiece have this report.
Acrobats, clowns, and jugglers, and a venue that hasn't been this packed in a long time.
Amis d'Erika, bonsoir!
In the middle of a pandemic, RICA, which stands for Intercultural Circus Meetings of Abidjan, is the organisation behind this festival. In Ivory Coast, the cultural sector has been hit hard by the COVID crisis.
Oui, il y en a qui disent que la culture est non essentielle. À cela, nous répondons qu'un peuple
without culture
sans culture
is a people without life. Culture is the soul of the people.
This year, because of COVID restrictions, all the performers are from African troops, and the venue is at 50% capacity. The theme of this year's event? Resistance.
These last few years, as far as the cultural sector for African artists is concerned, there is a dynamic of professionalization driven by international demand and the emergence of performance troupes. There were structures and networks emerging, and then suddenly it started to collapse. We cannot allow this sector to collapse economically. This is why we are doing this.
The opening ceremony gave a glimpse of each act to the public. This Ivorian circus company, created last year, has reinvented the daily lives of people living in Abidjan by mixing acrobatics and dance. They've had a tough time over the past few months.
It was really difficult because we weren't even able to see each other. Because of social distancing, we couldn't practice.
But now they're back on stage. The festival is running until Sunday at Abidjan's Institut Français and Agora in Kumasi.
Tonight's show was produced by Maya yet again. Thank you at home for watching. Do stay tuned. More news coming up.